Superbad is the story of three high school guys who go on an epic quest to secure booze for a graduation party, hoping to gain social favor and maybe even get laid in the process. At this point in time, it doesn't need much of an introduction, as back during its initial release in 2007, it pretty much became a comedy classic instantly. At least that's how I perceived it, as at the time I was only 10 years old and definitely wasn't allowed to watch such an outrageously raunchy movie. Instead, it became a film of legend, a monolith of forbidden comedy I'd hear referenced over the next few years amongst adults or my friends with less strict parents, as that movie with all the dick drawings and a period blood dance sequence. I had to see this film, and so a Sly Cooper-esque heist was performed, and I stole the DVD from my parents' movie collection, sneakily viewing it quietly in the middle of the night, doing my best to contain my laughter. I'd argue this is the best way to see Superbad. As a teenage boy watching characters that talk like you, or other dudes you know, acting in a way that would surely demand punishment from their parents if they knew. That's what this movie is. A day and subsequent night in the life of the American teenager. We watch our protagonists Seth and Evan as they attempt to live their lives to the fullest, making plenty of naive mistakes along the way. Their obnoxious behavior, Seth's in particular, is only endearing because of the ignorance of youth. Michael Cera and Jonah Hill really capture what it's like to be sexually frustrated teens, trying to navigate the awkwardness of their first potential shot at getting some. Watching this movie when I was younger, I thought these guys were the coolest, which probably says more about myself than I'd like to admit. But fuck it, this is the Superbad retrospective, and I'm here to tell you why this flick is important to me and still holds up today. Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg wrote Superbad when they were 13 years old, or at least that's when they started writing it. Obviously, it went through many changes and polishes by the time cameras actually began rolling, but when I found out that fun fact as a teenager myself, it made me feel like anything was possible. I mean, these guys wrote a movie about just bullshitting with their friends and pursuing crushes, and yet it was hilariously entertaining. The ability to take a simple premise and execute it in such an engaging way inspired me to take my own crack at it, resulting in a mediocre script about myself and my friends on our own adventure. I figured if those guys could write a movie as kids, why not me? That's one of the things I love the most about effective filmmaking, the ability to inspire. It may sound silly to describe a movie filled to the brim with dick jokes and more uses of the word fuck than Scarface as inspiring, but that's this sheep's opinion. And while nothing ever became of my teenage script, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how Superbad encouraged my interest in screenwriting. That's not because they were able to write just anything and get it made. What these two wrote was hysterical, resulting in one quotable scene after the next. The dialogue is quick and feels improvised even when it's not, reaching a level of verisimilitude difficult to achieve, especially with a cast primarily consisting of teenage characters. Every single interaction between Seth, Evan, and their friend/punching bag Fogel is laced with profanity-laden dialogue that borders on disgusting, yet remains charming on some level due to the performance of the actors. As I mentioned in the beginning, Seth is the most irritating character in the film. Jonah Hill's performance is loud and boisterous, dominating his scenes with a level of aggression that comes off as desperate. We can see that underneath all his bloviating, this is a young man that is extremely insecure, planning to try and hook up with inebriated girls, primarily because he believes that's the only way they'd ever consider him attractive. In other hands, a character like this could be considered extremely creepy, or at the very least overly pathetic, but Hill infuses the character with a humanity that shines through his over-the-top persona. Every now and then the mask comes off, and we see the pain he's hiding underneath, particularly near the end of the film in conversations with both Evan and the character's crush, Jules. I couldn't help but find myself rooting for him to this day, even when his plans reach levels of pure childishness. Green beer, anyone? Evan, on the other hand, is the opposite end of the spectrum of adolescent awkwardness. Whether it be accidentally punching a boob, defending his purchase of spermicidal lube, or singing for a group of cokeheads, there's not a sequence in this flick where this character comes off as comfortable in his own skin. Michael Cera perfected this technique while on Arrested Development, and this character really does feel like an extension of that. An R-rated George Michael, if you will. He has the demeanor of a beaten dog, appearing almost afraid to speak at the worst of times and unsure of what to say at the best. The more quiet and reserved nature of the character is juxtaposed incredibly effectively against Seth, giving the two the perfect push and pull of a comedic duo. But the real star of the show, as we all know, is the introduction of Christopher Mintz-Plasse as McLovin, a character that will surely go down in the annals of film history alongside other greats like Luke Skywalker and Hannibal Lecter. A paragon of character creation, this socially inept high schooler turned 25-year-old organ donor is a man of legend. But seriously though, this character and his subsequent storyline is largely responsible for the film's staying power. Here we have Fogel, who much like Seth and Evan wants to gain acceptance from his peers through the purchase of alcohol. He's already taken a step towards this mission when we first meet him, having set up a rendezvous to obtain a fake ID. The twist? He's decided to make his false identity McLovin, resulting in one of the most iconic sequences in the movie. When Fogel attempts to use his new ID to secure booze for our three heroes, he's assaulted by a man robbing the store. This gives us our introduction to our two remaining main characters, Officer Slater and Officer Michaels. These two police officers have got to be the most inept ever put to screen, unable to even take a simple eyewitness statement on a low-level crime. Instead, these two are much more interested in taking McLovin under their wing for a night he won't ever forget. Our storylines diverge here, and the movie becomes equally about Seth and Evan's quest to make it to the party, and McLovin's adventure with two corrupt officers who can party pretty much anywhere. It's hard to tell which is the more ultimate teen fantasy, getting drunk and having sex at a party, or driving around wasted with a pair of cops, smoking cigarettes and shooting guns. Fogel differs from our other protagonists because he somehow shows us the most comfortable of the three. At first, he's clearly intimidated by the officers, but once he realizes they're not your standard idea of policemen, he quickly lets his guard down and becomes one of the bros. These officers are completely out of their minds, but they do share a couple of teachable moments with McLovin, acting as mentors in a storyline that seldom features adult wisdom. They're essentially teenagers themselves, having never quite grown out of childish habits like ignoring important calls or playing lightsabers with their flashlights. Rogen's character even draws his gun in a crowded restaurant, a moment of complete buffoonery, like a kid playing cops and robbers instead of abiding by actual police procedure. In fact, it's the officer's ineptitude that leads our branching stories to come crashing back into one another, when Hader's character runs over Seth, which then leads to a chase sequence and a reuniting of the three. Going back just a second, the fight between Seth and Evan prior to the car crash is raw and revealing. It's the moment in the film where the characters finally get real with each other and say what's on their minds underneath the high school antics. Their true problems are laid bare for the audience to see. Evan has grown to resent their friendship due to Seth's neediness, and Seth is tired of Evan's passive attitude, unwilling to address issues out of fear of conflict. They're both valid points, and it's clear that this conversation has been a long time coming. The relationship between these two is the heart of the film. It's commented on by almost every character they come in contact with, painting a picture of two best friends that the world at large knows to be inseparable. Unfortunately, one of the harsh realities of growing up is separation, and the anxiety that comes with it. While Evan may be frustrated that Seth's obnoxious behavior has weighed down his own social stock, the reality is that he needs him to feel secure. The same can be said for Seth, who seems to have only had Evan as a friend through the majority of his childhood. The point of this fight is for these two to get everything off their chests, to leave nothing unsaid before they are no longer a constant in each other's lives. It's heartbreaking. The kind of dramatic scene that can only be undercut by a drunk police officer violently running over one of the two. After McLovin ditches the cops and reunites with his friends, the three finally make their way to the party for the third act of the film. This is where the revelations come from, the true moral of the story and whatnot. We see each of the three meet up with their established crushes and face the moment of truth. Can they seduce their respective ladies and finally lose their virginities? No. Well, not for Seth and Evan at least. The final party and the attempts at hooking up are when the movie goes from juvenile comedy to mature commentary. Yes, there are still plenty of funny lines, like Becca drunkenly calling Evan a bitch for being nervous, but the point of these scenes is to show that the characters have all gone about this the wrong way. Except Jules, that is. Jules is a boss. Evan and Becca have decided to mask their anxiety with excessive alcohol use, resulting in Evan questioning the ethics of the situation, understandably concerned with how his sexual experiences reflect his respect for women. and Becca just straight up gets sick after being overly confident in her inexperienced sexual abilities. Seth, on the other hand, can barely hold a conversation with Jules, his insecurities drunkenly pouring out to a girl who actually is attracted to him, just not when he's wasted. The irony that he would have actually had a shot with her had he not made his entire night about acquiring booze is punctuated by her attempt to comfort him being cut off by Seth falling forward and headbutting her. Seth and Evan are both learning life lessons about confidence and courting, especially having the women involved make clear that they are, or at least were, interested. Had they just been forthright in their feelings and not tried to use alcohol as a shield, they could have built more meaningful relationships instead of nearly getting puked on and giving out black eyes. The only guy who remains cool, calm, and collected is of course everybody's favorite Irish R&B singer. While he may only have sex for approximately 2 seconds before his cop pals burst in and ruin the mood, he is in fact the only one that does get laid, if you could call it that. After a moment of reconciliation, he's once again on top of the world when his cop friends make him look like a badass and enlist him in one final mission: the destruction of their police cruiser. In contrast to McLovin's action-packed ending, Seth and Evan return to Evan's pad for one final sleepover. This is the other side of the coin that was their fight on the street, a moment for the two to finally admit the extent of the love they have for one another, reassurance to the audience that their friendship is going to remain intact even after the growing pains of the new chapter that is adulthood. Moments like this one are what make this film transcend just being a raunchy comedy into a film with legitimate heart. Just as we can relate to the difficulties and awkwardness of our first sexual experience, the ebbs and flows of friendship are another element of humanity that make this story accessible even with its crass nature. The mall epilogue only further cements this as a coming-of-age film, showing the audience a new side to these two, boys who have become men, only now understanding how to talk to their respective love interests. It's the smoothest we get to see either of them operate, effectively tying off both the chasing girls and friendship arcs in one swift move, as the two finally let go and take their first steps toward life as adults. And then we immediately undercut it with a credit sequence that's just full of dick drawings, because this is Superbad. Rewatching this film, I've come to the conclusion that it is truly timeless, not because of the excessively profane dialogue and scenarios, but because of the heart at its core. As a teenager, I wanted this to be my life, and as an adult, the movie serves as an emotionally resonant version of Remember When? The characters are naive and immature, and that's what makes the film so hilarious. Because I have been these idiots at one point in my life, and chances are you have too. It's a reminder of the free-spirited nature of youth, when the only problems were, does she like me, and how can I get as messed up as possible this weekend? It's the kind of movie that will make you want to call your high school friends and reminisce about the good old days, while simultaneously being grateful for the knowledge you've gained since. When it comes to these retrospectives, I'm not going to put grades on them the way I would my normal reviews, because these videos are reserved for films that hold a special place in my heart. Films that would be impossible for me to remain objective about at this point. Just know that if I cover a flick this way, it means that I highly recommend you check it out. I mean, if you haven't seen Superbad, what are you doing with your life? Thank you so much for watching. Yeah, you. I'm talking to you specifically. Thank you.